Russia wants to attack the Baltics to capitalize in Ukraine. I know. It sounds like a bonkers headline, but that appears to be exactly what is happening. Let me explain. Where we left off yesterday, we knew that CIA Director John Ratcliffe had traveled to Moscow for a high-level meeting with someone about something. Given the evidence at hand, the fact that this was a spy chief, not a diplomat, and the historical precedent of Biden's CIA director making a similar trip in November 2021, I argue that the most likely explanation was that Western officials had uncovered some sort of Russian plot to attack a NATO country. Ratcliffe therefore went to Moscow to tell the Kremlin that the West knew about the plan and would expose it if Russia started making motions in that direction. Fast forward a few hours, and multiple outlets, citing insiders with knowledge of the meeting, reported that this is exactly what happened. Now, I want to pause for a second here. This sounds like an opportunity for me to take a victory lap, having predicted to a T what was happening behind the scenes. However, I do not think that this is something to celebrate, and not just because it is another step toward a world that I do not want to live in. Rather, this was not a particularly bold prediction. Yes, one of the key themes you may have taken away from our last 4 years together is that the answers to interesting questions in international relations are often not answerable, and pundits trying to tell you otherwise are either lying to themselves or lying to you. And it is not because we are dumb as keyboard warriors. It is a structural problem. If we knew the answers to these questions, then certainly the policymakers would know the answers to these questions, and so we would never reach a point where the questions become a part of the public conversation, precisely because the policymakers would have dealt with the problem already. Ironically, a spy chief's secret mission to Moscow did not fall into that category. There are only so many things that are appropriate for the head of the CIA to be doing there, and if you were following the intelligence leaks over the last few weeks, it was not hard to put the pieces together. I think it is telling how either the prevailing internet sentiment treated the trip as a big mystery, or worse, that Ratcliffe was there to negotiate the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact 2.0. Shockingly, when the internet indulges in unfounded conspiracy theories, the internet wastes everyone's time getting wrapped up in ridiculous conversations. It sure does sound like I am taking a victory lap now, but there is a critical point here that has nothing to do with my personal ego trip. Hold that thought for a moment as we open up the newspaper and learn more about the specifics of the meeting. Well, no, actually, we still do not have much in the way of details here. I will also explain that point in a moment. But the reports from basically all major news outlets at this hour simply indicate that Ratcliffe went to Moscow to warn the Kremlin against taking provocative actions that Western intelligence had learned that Russians may soon be executing. No details yet on what those provocative actions are. No details either on what Ratcliffe may have been briefing Latvia about while he spent Monday there. The only other kernel of information is that Ratcliffe had a side mission of telling Russia to stop assisting Iran, which, if we are being honest here, could have been an email and that the Kremlin immediately ignored. Whether the Kremlin ignored the first part remains to be seen. However, now that we have confirmation that this was the meeting's main point, it is worth discussing the broad features of the Kremlin plot, whether it has any hope to work, and how NATO is trying to disrupt it. We have discussed the skeleton of the Kremlin's plan before. Take some provocative action against a NATO country, create a diplomatic crisis, use that to generate a rally round the flag effect, and then channel that patriotic energy into securing support for a large-scale mobilization. Actually, the first part of this plan is nothing new. It has been almost a year since Russia began a campaign of grief against NATO countries, including but not limited to Russian drones just so happening to find their way into Poland, Russian drones just so happening to find their way into Romania, jammed Ukrainian drones just so happening to find their way into Latvia and causing enough of a scandal to trigger their prime minister's resignation, Russian aircraft just so happening to brush Estonian airspace, and explosives of a totally unknown origin just so happening to find their way to the tarmac of a German airport. Also, over the last year, we have seen a relatively muted response from NATO. There were a couple of Article 4 consultations at the beginning of the saga, but other than enhanced and coordinated defense measures, there has not been much in the way of a proactive response. Proactive response, maybe my new favorite oxymoron. Anyway, NATO has not done more because that is precisely what Russia wants out of this. They are called provocative attacks for a reason. They are designed to provoke a response. But the only response so far is NATO trying to stay above the fray. I used the phrase, "don't fall for the trap," almost a year ago, and that remains the mantra today. However, we run into a bit of a problem with the incentive structure created here, and we are starting to observe the consequences. If a provocative attack is not provoking a response, then perhaps the attack is not provocative enough. That, at least, appears to be the lesson that the Kremlin is internalizing, hence this new and unknown stage of escalation that forced Ratcliffe to Moscow. Now, what exactly that level of escalation is remains unclear. As I said yesterday, the intelligence community probably has something very specific in its hands, which is why this became a trip instead of a simple phone call. The reason that they are keeping the details close to the chest is because of the same balancing act that Zelensky faced on the eve of the invasion. If everyone starts to panic before the problem actually begins, then you have essentially handed your enemy a free victory. For example, if the unknown intelligence report says that Russia plans to send little green men to Narva, Estonia, then announcing that now just results in the evacuation of Narva. And we may get to that point, but we are not there yet. When the United States uncovered the invasion plot 5 years ago, there was a 2-week gap between the private Moscow meeting and some declassified intelligence reports entering the public domain. It was about a month before it became a concerted media campaign. So maybe we will start learning more about this in September. Or maybe this time Russia will internalize the warning and cancel the plan, and the most we will hear about this is 2 months from now, in the form of an unappreciated Washington Post exposé of what we narrowly avoided. Whether the public revelation strategy will work depends in part on whether Putin can thread a political needle with his domestic audience. And that, in part, depends on how receptive the broader international audience is to the warnings. Back in 2021, the Biden administration intended to reveal the Kremlin's invasion plan to rally public support for Ukraine and prevent Russia from executing any false flags. The latter component was effective. It is hard to execute a false flag operation if the other side already publicized what you were going to do before you did it. Then again, maybe that part was unnecessary, given how the perpetrators did not know the difference between SIM cards and the Sims. In contrast, the rallying support for Ukraine component did not work so well. European leaders did not seriously reject this notion, but also did not seriously believe that Putin was serious about the whole thing. Thus, there was plenty of theoretical support for Ukraine. There just was not much practical support until the invasion began. Jumping back to today, the current outlook has improved on some fronts, but gotten worse on others. Few leaders in Europe are skeptical of Putin's intentions anymore, and we have seen an intra-alliance power shift over the last 5 years. The eastern flank was warning of these problems all along, but not enough people were listening to them. Having been proven right, they now have more of a leadership role in choosing the direction of the alliance, or at least a leadership role disproportional to their size. To speculate a bit here, Ratcliffe did not just stop in Latvia because it was a possible target. He was also there because the country takes the situation seriously. The flip side is that public opinion in the West has drifted further into the conspiratorial realm over the last 5 years. And that leaves the door open to a couple of potential problems down the line. Last time, the Biden administration's goal was to inform external actors about what was to come. This time, there is that same global audience, plus now the domestic Russian audience. The global audience's role here, particularly in NATO countries, is to understand what could happen and take a measured response. The attack is Russian. If it is done with a false flag, it is still Russian, and there need to be appropriate countermeasures against Russia. At the same time, the purpose of the attack remains to provoke NATO. So rushing into Article 5 mode and promptly bombing any sites connected to the attack might not be the best idea. This is where Putin gets on the airwaves, explains to the Russian public how Western fascists have attacked Russia without provocation, and now is the time to act. Oh, and by the way, we need to send more of you to Ukraine. Ukraine comes first. Then we will deal with NATO. Of course, Russia never gets around to that part, because that would be a bad idea. But Putin gets what he wants by moving more men into Ukraine. Heck, he does not even need to say that part out loud. He can just say that there must be a mobilization wave to harden Russia's western borders. And maybe 30,000 soldiers indeed go that way. But then 300,000 have poorly calibrated compasses and end up in Ukraine. Oopsie. On the international stage, NATO can combat this by having coordinated the response ahead of time. Maybe Article 5 is indeed invoked, but then the measures necessary to restore security to the North Atlantic region are to give every remaining ATACMS rocket in the inventories to Ukraine. If NATO is not creating a new front, it is much harder for Putin to claim that a mobilization is necessary. Also on the international stage, having countries like China and India aware of the situation is important. Both are still enjoying making a bunch of money while watching the war from the sidelines. However, neither is particularly enthusiastic about the prospects of a major power war between Europe and Russia. In fact, they will not be able to make a ton of money off the war anymore, because at that point, Europe will block all Russian oil from leaving Federation harbors. I suspect that US intelligence officials are now briefing their counterparts in both of those countries about the situation, even if we do not hear about it because there are no high-profile trips happening to either. Side note, Xi will be visiting the United States next month. And then we get to the Russian domestic audience. They also need to know about what is happening ahead of time, because there is a common interest between them and the West. Putin is using you to attack us. And we mean using you in both senses of the word. So resist the mobilization, leave the country, foment a revolution, whatever. Just do not play his game. The trick here is that the Kremlin controls Russia's domestic media. It is not as bad as a country like North Korea, but the government can control the narrative. Overcoming that problem requires having this be the worldwide news story, so it breaks through Russia's media wall and permeates throughout society. You can see how the conspiracy theories are causing problems all down this list. If a large chunk of people treat a US intelligence report as meaningless, even when European intelligence agencies are corroborating various parts of it, then the story gets buried. It does not permeate through Russian society. Deterrence is lost. The attack does happen, and the wave of conspiracy theories only grows larger. And going in the opposite direction, some call for stronger countermeasures that ultimately play into the Kremlin's hands. This is the worst security crisis that the West has encountered since the end of the Cold War. It beats everything that happened during the Bush administration, because the strength of the opponent is nuclear, and the target is the whole coalition. It is happening on top of an already strained security environment because of Ukraine. And the coalition only has weeks, or maybe a few months, to figure it out. Meanwhile, if you have a question that you would like to figure out, you can ask it over on the Geopolitics Helpline. There is a whole archive of its contents here from my secondary channel. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.